Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse podcast live stream number 24 Q&A section, where we will answer your Q's with our A's to the best of our ability. Okay, shall we get right to it?
You said you wanted to start with something.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yep.
There is a certain amount of bad behavior in the chat and comments, and I know that this is standard for YouTube. I also know that for Heather and me, this has been a lot less terrible than it is on most other channels. So thank you for being disciplined. And I know that as the channel grows, this is going to be a problem as new people show up and they don't realize that there's actually a community spirit around here. And in any case, to the extent that you can figure out ways to disincentivize that behavior, please do. And to the extent that there are numbskulls who want to come into the chat and do anything they can to start a race war or whatever else you're trying to do, please don't. This is very serious. No matter what side of the political spectrum you may be on, we are in a very difficult moment in history, a moment when there's so much gasoline and tinder around that one numbskull might be able to set the whole thing aflame. And it would be a terrible shame if it were here on this channel. So please don't do it. All right.
Good.
To the Q's and A's.
All right. We're going to start, as always, many good questions. I've only looked at a few of them, but we are going to start with a question that has been asked twice previously, which we didn't get to twice. So here we go. Are you at all concerned that growing global tensions between the USA and China are leading us to an inevitable Cold War and, quite possibly, an actual hot war in the near future where the legacy superpower, USA, faces off against the latest up-and-comer, China?
Yes. In fact, I'm not even sure that the political discord that we find ourselves running into is not being seeded or amplified by some of our enemies who have recognized that we have set ourselves up for failure and that if they stir the pot at this moment, we may well do ourselves in and save them the trouble. So
yeah, it's the new crypto warfare.
It's the new crypto warfare, and we would be very wise. The hardest thing is you don't see this system, broken as it is doing a tremendous amount of work that you don't notice. The part that functions is not visible, and you'll detect it when it's gone. So yeah. We all have an interest in preserving this structure. The idea that this is the moment that we're going to go after George Washington, of all people, is so absurd and so dangerous. We have to recognize what it is that unites us and what it is that separates us. And let's do something about that latter part. But tearing apart the former part is an act of purest insanity.
And can I just remind those who may not remember that you say this as someone who, and this is true for me too, who sees neither of the major party candidates as viable solutions to the problems that we have. In part because, put aside Trump for the moment, but why isn't Biden a viable solution? He's basically given us the Bush line, put aside his likely mental incompetence, but he's giving us the sort of Bush 2 line, Bush 1 line of stay the course. That's Bush 1, right? Stay the course. And you have been arguing for decades that the many parts of the course are broken. So it is not that you think that everything is fine. This is not a Voltairean, a Candide-like universe in which everything is going along just fine. But the fundamentals of the system, which are working, are invisible to those who are complaining that the entire thing must be burned down.
And it is very like quitting smoking. The fact is, this is a terrible time to have to figure out what to do, but it keeps getting worse. So as bad as it is now to have to figure out how to rescue ourselves from two non-viable candidates, you don't want it to be worse. And it is not the fault of people who have been telling you this election after election. It's not our fault. The fact that you're finally listening, that is not on us.
Yeah. And I guess just one more thing about this. I was thinking about the distinction between Cold War and Hot War, which made a lot of sense. I think it's a distinction to make up through the late 80s or so when the Cold War nominally ended. But the crypto war that can go on, the war of information that is now possible at all moments in all places, actually doesn't care if the war is also otherwise cold or hot. So that will continue regardless. And that means that the boundaries between these things are even harder to determine.
Yeah, actually, good point. Let me add one thing to it. This is a new thought. I reserve the right to go back and fix it.
Yeah.
You've got Cold Wars and Hot Wars. You've got something we call terrorism. terrorism is the hijacking of your fight or flight reflex to get you to harm yourself. An enemy that can't harm you uses terror to get you to harm yourself. Same way that it might get your immune system to compromise you if it can't outright hurt you. This cyber meddling in our ability to think straight is not terror. It's not that you go on Twitter and are terrified into hurting yourself, but it's like they drug us. Whoever it is that feeds bad information into that system is basically bewildering us so that we will fall off a cliff or fall down the stairs or something like that. And the fact is, the first thing to do is recognize something doesn't want us to see clearly. There's organic noise, and then there's amplified noise. Your enemy might only have to get you confused enough to get yourself into a civil war, for example, that you can't afford, and that would do their bidding. They won't fight you. They'll have you fight you. So,
yeah, no, there is a lot more here with regard to what emotions are being played. It's not terror, as you say, but is it, creating such slothfulness and complacency that you don't bother to get up, and at the point that you do, you're so outraged at what you have been led to believe that you then spill into the streets and destroy statues of George Washington. Is there no middle ground left possible when it's this kind of information war?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Different neighborhoods and cultures have different levels of noise at night. For instance, loud music, mufflers that roar like lions by homes. Poor sleep lowers IQ and impulse control. Can sleep disturbances from loud noises affect academic and economic gaps? Are there solutions? It's a really good question.
It's a great question. I mean, it includes so much of the information you need in it.
Exactly.
That it almost answers itself. But yeah, the thing is, go to the rich neighborhood. You'll see what's good. We know. It's not a secret.
Yeah.
Right? We can talk all we want about, GMOs are just a modification like humans have been doing for thousands of years. It's garbage. They eat organic food in the rich neighborhood, and you can't afford it in the poor neighborhood. You may not even be able to source it. So, yeah, the good neighborhood is quieter. It has better schools. It has higher quality food. It has
There's more
all
nature,
of the advantages.
there's more space.
Yeah.
You wake up to bird song, not car horns. And that's less true in dense urban centers. And it is one of the reasons that cities like New York were actually melting pots and did actually experience I think reductions in racism because people were really living side by side and not just across the standard demographics we're expected to talk about today along race lines, but about socioeconomic lines. But in most cities, and certainly as soon as you get out of the city center, they're very stratified.
They are, and even in New York, if you're really wealthy, you live by the park, and so one side of your building looks out on a quieter, nicer space. So anyway, yes, it's not, you can't compare between cities necessarily, but we know what works. We know what's harmful, and we externalize all of this harm onto people who are not politically powerful enough to prevent it. And so, yes, the answer to your question is there are solutions, and they involve confronting what it is that actually causes well-being and opportunity to be hoarded in some parts of town and excluded from others. And there ain't no way of getting around it. We either confront it, or it's the French Revolution or worse.
Yeah. No, and I guess, again, this could warrant many, many hours of conversation, but usually when we talk about pollution, and until 20 years ago, whenever you heard talk about pollution, it was about particulate matter, actual things that could lodge in you and cause either physical or chemical or biological damage. But noise pollution and light pollution are real. These are not just made up fictions by the liberal chattering academic classes. This is absolutely 100% real. And having access to true darkness at night and true silence when you choose to have it are luxuries that were not luxuries but expectations of human existence for most of humanity's existence on the planet. And the lack of ability to procure those things for a large proportion of people is staggeringly bad.
Yeah. I would say there's also some kind of pollution that I don't think has a name. It's like reality pollution. If you go to certain neighborhoods, you'll find, the billboards are right adjacent to the dwelling. And if you
Mm-hmm.
go to the wealthy neighborhood, if somebody put up a billboard in the middle of your gated community, there would be such an uprising that, it wouldn't last the afternoon. So anyway, people know what to protect their own kids from, to the extent that the people who have the resources to protect their kids from everything bad are, telling us what it is that's harmful. We shouldn't be allowing those things near anybody's kids.
Yeah, that's right. Next question. You voiced, so this is written in telegraphically to save characters, but I will try to read it as if it's written in full words. You have voiced a sense of hopelessness about reaching the wokies. David Fuller of Rebel Wisdom says he's focusing on having this conversation without triggering the immune response. I want to suggest that we take cues from Benjamin Boyce, especially in his recent episode with the Jungian. I don't know, I'm not familiar with that episode, but obviously we're familiar with Benjamin Boyce and with David Fuller at Rebel Wisdom, and that's the question.
Let's put it this way. The experience of trying to reach the truly woke is not a positive one, because even to the extent that you can reach an individual, it doesn't last. It's not durable, because they return to whatever milieu it is that caused the wokeness in the first place, and it gets undone.
Although there's maybe a little seed planted.
Oh, believe me, I'm a big fan of planting the seed that can germinate later, but there's also a campaign to eradicate those seeds. So,
for sure.
The fact, though, is, or maybe this is actually just the point you were just making, we have started to hear, often it comes in the form of an apology, which I must say I don't think I need. But people have started to contact us and say, I got it wrong. I thought it was just college campuses. I thought you were exaggerating. Now I see, right?
Mm-hmm. In the wake of the last 3 weeks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't need an apology, especially if you're a big enough person to recognize that you were wrong and actually say it to somebody that you think you may have discounted. That's a big thing, and that's all that's necessary from my perspective. What I would ask beyond that is, okay, now that you've seen it, find your courage, because you're going to need it, right? Mm-hmm. And with respect to the woke, it's not one level of wokeness, right? There are people who are rescuable, and the fact is, to the extent that we start bringing people over to the side of reason, then we have greater leverage to access people who are more deeply ensconced. And so I do think most of the people involved in this movement are not aware of what they have signed up with.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I found just in the last couple of days, I had interactions with some people who I know in a business relationship with, like a structural integration therapist and a hairdresser, and someone else I can't remember. So people who I have iterative relationships with, I will see them again. I enjoy them very much, but I don't know them well, and they don't know me well. And it's easier, especially for women on average, to just let the conversation go. And when someone says something that you disagree with, to not disagree, especially right now, right? Especially given that we are all being expected to adopt the new gods, and not doing so on my part. With these people who I had already chosen to interact with on the basis that they are reasonable and honorable and not completely ideological, was still not the easiest thing in the world, but absolutely 100% worth doing. And I would say that everyone can do at least that.
Yeah, it's
everyone
rewarding.
Can do at least that. That when you hear someone say something in what sounds like knee-jerk support of, say, a movement or an organization that you don't think is what it appears, giving a little nudge in the direction of what you think can be the thing necessary to change people's minds, and just to open them up to the possibility that what they've been told isn't the full truth, and maybe is not any of the truth, in fact.
So what I've said a number of times is that there's actually a thing you can train yourself to do, which is very rewarding, which is when you have an unbridgeable gap, figure out whether or not you can cross it. In other words, there are some gaps you probably can't cross, but you can practice the skill, and the gaps you can cross get bigger and bigger. and it's very rewarding when you get across them. So if we all took that approach, we might do much better.
Yeah. Okay. This looks like a 3-part question. I'll read it all and then see where we go back to. Hi, you two. First, simply thanks. Is there a societal connectedness analog to Dunbar's number? We've gone from a small group of primates to a global society, but there are no guarantees beyond that. Where is our code's limit or carrying capacity? Recent events cause me to wonder what feedbacks exist within us that grow with societal complexity, undermining pro-social behaviors, for instance, cooperation. And barring a compensatory mechanism like swarming in bees, we'd be on the road to a collapse. At best, a second dark ages. At worst, a weapons of mass destruction fueled species-level existential crisis. Our wings are still growing, so there's no swarming off this rock quite yet.
Well, I would say it's all a question of hacking and kludging. And that there are things, one of the curious facts of modern life is that people, your television, think back to the 50s. The television in the living room is a window into lives that are not near you. And you are a creature that is not programmed to deal with the ability to actually look in visually on a life that isn't near you. Looking in is always about proximity, right? You can describe a life that's far away, but it's not realistic. We come to view some of the people on our screens as if we know them. And then now, decades after this became commonplace, we are now getting to know them. And the fact is, this relationship isn't exactly a television relationship, right? So we are finding mechanisms that rebuild our humanity to each other in a way that actually is robust. In the meantime, it has fragile elements, and we have to be very careful to protect it, and things breaking down into clickbait discussions and things like that is very hazardous. But I think I'm not without hope about the process of us giving a damn about each other. I actually think that part can be done, but we have to escape the things that are built in to upset it in order to get to a landscape where we do feel that way.
This is actually one of the things that Livestream does, as opposed to recorded and played later. Even for those which is true for the vast majority of people who end up, for instance, watching these things that we're doing, the vast majority of people who see them are not tuned in now. They're not watching them live. But for those of you who are, you know that we're sitting here talking right now, and that brings us closer, metaphorically. And when people watch it later, they know that there were more than just the two of us participating here right now. Even though we can't see your chat, we don't know what it is that you're writing to each other right now, but we know it's happening. And we'll get a little feedback from our mod afterwards as to how it went today. But mostly that's happening beyond our ability to see, but it is creating a kind of community the way that television piped in can't.
So actually, two things occur to me in this light. One is there was a difference on Rogan this time to all the previous ones, which was that this time Rogan has changed his podcast so that it is no longer live. And I must say, I didn't even think about it. I thought it was a trivial difference until he actually started. And because he starts differently when it's live, it was immediately jarring to know that it was just him and me in a room, and that there's this principle that I say to people who are new to public life, which is you've got to remember the room is not the room, right? The room is not the room. You are in a room with somebody, but the room may be the internet or the world, and it may be people 10 years in the future if you say something now and it gets brought up then. You have to be mindful of that. And Rogan's room, that gap, the gap between the room you're in and the actual room is the maximum gap.
Yep, exactly.
Right?
It couldn't be bigger.
Couldn't be bigger.
Well, there is no bigger at this point on Earth.
And there's almost no smaller. It's you and Joe and Jamie, right? Or in the case that you and I were on together, that the two of us and Joe and Jamie. It's a very small, intimate room that is outward looking to this gigantic thing. And there's something intangibly different. Your point about even if you arrive at this video, a week from now, you know that people were there live, and that means that they sort of proxy for your reaction, right? Whereas knowing that it went out afterwards and that it hit the internet all at once has a very different impact. So somehow we need to think more carefully about how we interface and start to bootstrap the intimacy that we lost in the television and early internet eras.
Very good. We have a question from an editor of a major magazine in Slovenia who would like to get in touch with us. Zach, if you would highlight that somehow so we can try to get back to that. What do you think of the theory that SARS-CoV-2 originated in the Philippines? I haven't heard that theory. Hypothesis. Sorry.
Yes, hypothesis is right. I have not heard it either. I would love to know what it is based upon.
Yeah, I need to know. I would need to know more.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. If it originated in the Philippines, then we need an explanation of why it shows up in Wuhan.
Right.
In other words, what would have to be true for that hypothesis to be likely is there would have to be a sequence divergence in a population of the virus early on in the Philippines. What we don't see in Wuhan is the fumbling around that the virus would be expected to do in its early phase after it had jumped to humans.
Right. Well, I mean, unless it was created in the Philippines and moved to Wuhan.
You mean, well, you're talking about artificially created.
Human, yeah, artificially.
Yeah, well, I mean, right. If we're talking about it being artificially created.
Then all bets are off. Then, it could have been created anywhere.
Yeah, well, if it was intentional.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
So anyway, I would say before we dig a hole any deeper, we ought to figure out what this hypothesis is based on and whether there's anything to it. But my guess is probably it's just noise.
Yep. Okay, so this person makes a statement and then asks for our thoughts. The statement is, animals seek and find patterns whether they are there or not. This patternicity plus agenticity This patternicity plus agenticity birthed superstitions among humans. Given enough time, other animals will too inevitably adopt religions before developing a bullshit meter that is like our scientific method. What are your thoughts?
I think there's too much loaded into the idea that superstition is the pathological version of something that is usually not pathological. It is the detection of patterns whose explanation you don't know, but are nonetheless a useful indicator of something.
Are you sure you mean pathological? That seems a little strong.
No, I mean it.
Okay.
I mean it. And I don't mean it to have connotations beyond that it is maladaptive.
Yeah, it's the broken version.
It's the broken version.
Intuitions that become reified as aphorisms. When they're wrong, we call them superstitions.
Right. And patterns that occur for reasons you can't figure out, but nonetheless help you limit the search area for something or something along those lines, are usually, if 9 times in 10, what passes through this machinery is productive, and one time in 10
machinery?
No, passes through the whatever the intuition component rather than the superstition component.
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, it helps you. 1 time out of 10, it's purely nonsense. That's still a huge win. So, in any case, animals do have superstition. This has been demonstrated in chickens, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Where somebody basically set up a conveyor belt on which I think it was like rocks and corn were sent down in a random sequence. So they used a random number generator to figure out whether the next thing on the belt was going to be a rock or corn. And patterns, of course, exist there that don't mean anything. You know, a random sequence will have little patterns in it. Mm-hmm. And the chickens would pick up expectation, which you could tell they had by how long they looked, based on patterns that just happened to be in the
misapprehension of pattern that was actually noise, misapprehension of noise into pattern, and then changing future behavior based on that.
Yep.
Hypothesis. Coronavirus was released intentionally by a single malevolent individual, most likely a lab employee. He or she just wanted to cause mayhem similarly to high school shooters. Any thoughts? How likely is this to have happened?
It is very difficult to rule something like that out, but I would say absent evidence of it, one can drive themselves crazy. Let's put it this way. In general, human beings behave semi-rationally, which means that we can infer something about why people do things based on the fact that it would make sense to do this and it wouldn't make sense to do that. And even things like a school shooter may be, there's always a question, and this has changed Some of these shooters don't die in
Yeah.
the event anymore, which changes the logic substantially. But if somebody is going to engage in mayhem that is going to end their life, there's always a question about whether or not they had decided to commit suicide first and then decided to add some mayhem to it, or if they decided to commit some mayhem and then accepted the loss of their life. Those are two different kinds of events that look very similar.
They're fundamentally different, and they look interchangeable on the outside.
Yeah, but nonetheless, if somebody decided to put their death to something that they found productive, like gaining fame or something like that, it's obviously an insane behavior, but it is not incomprehensible.
Well, but I mean, I would say that the one other thing that suggests against this, with the understanding that we just couldn't know, it's unlikely and we can't know, but that there's no element of fame here. That doing this kind of thing anonymously actually is very rare. Truly evil acts are themselves relatively rare, but they tend to come with a quest for fame.
Yeah, or resources. So I've said you can't rule out the possibility that somebody with, no moral decency and a desire to make money could have set loose a pathogen, knowing that it would harm certain industries that they could then short. So anyway, that's a very frightening prospect, and it's more sensible than somebody anonymously causing mayhem.
Yep. Okay, here's a question. Are you familiar with Stephen L. Talbot? He's written many interesting articles on evolution, and his 1995 book, The Future Does Not Compute, was a good warning on how antisocial the internet would become. I am not familiar with him.
I don't think I am either.
Yeah, but I will highlight it. CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle. How long will it be permitted? Are the authorities trying to force Trump to send in the military? Shouldn't POTUS do something when locals won't? There's been a murder there already. How long can this go on?
Yeah, there was a double shooting last night, I think. One of the people died. I don't know what the state of the other one is. How long can this go on? Here's the problem. We've got a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And I would say damned if you do is better. We cannot allow this to happen.
But I mean, the second part, so this is actually our friend Holly Mathnerd asking this. The second question here, are the authorities trying to force Trump to send in the military? That certainly gives them cover. If it's, I don't remember who the mayor in Seattle is. I never do. But Inslee, the governor of Washington, another, I'm going to go ahead and use your term, decrepit clown, certainly wants cover. He'd really rather say that his mean parents told him he had to than he has to, because he's not going to he's going to lose votes if he's the one to crack down on this, even though he shouldn't. Yep. He should it's absolutely 100% his job to crack down on it. But if he forces Trump to do something and then he gets to complain loudly about how Trump is overstepping his authority, even though this thing needs to end, then that potentially, frankly, it would solve Inslee's immediate problem. But it probably also continues to feed Trump more approval.
Yep. I think there are a lot of games that could be played. For one thing, Inslee has aspirations for higher office, or at least he did until recently. It's possible that the idea is to get Trump to do something that will be unpopular in certain places and will shift votes to Biden or something. I am going to push back on your use of the reserved term decrepit clown.
Because Inslee isn't decrepit?
No, he's decrepit, and he's a clown. But I would say he is a B-list decrepit clown.
True, yeah, B-list decrepit clown, which is in some ways an even harsher criticism.
Oh, really. It's harsher.
Yeah, B-list decrepit clown.
B-list decrepit clown.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
very good. We don't like this guy.
No. Well, he hung us out to dry.
Yes, he did.
He absolutely hung us out to dry.
100%.
That's the reason that we take such a dim view of him.
Yeah.
Well, also that he's dim.
Yeah, he is dim. Yeah, you actually interacted with him, right? One of your TED Talks.
I was on a panel with him. No, it wasn't TED Talk. It was a talk at Evergreen on basically the Anthropocene and what to think about it. Mm-hmm. And he impressed me as a total stuffed shirt.
That's the term he used. Yeah,
total stuffed shirt. And he gave a talk that was completely empty and self-congratulatory about how Washington was leading the world towards a green future and all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah. He's got a lot of wishy-washy stuff to say on climate change, a position that we have a lot of thoughts on as well. And I just wish that we had better leaders on this front. How dare he be the guy that's going to going to be carrying that flag.
Yep.
So B-list decrepit clown.
Yeah.
Excellent. How do we determine if the collateral damage of the protests and or woke culture is worth it? We've been taught that the Black Panthers were necessary for MLK to be more palatable. What if all this works? It's really, the second part of that is not something I had put together. That the connection, one thing that immediately jumps out at me here is we do have many people who could be doing the work of MLK, but what we have at the moment is, if this is right, if this analogy is right, the equivalent of the Black Panthers taking over and becoming the dominant voice, and it's not that they're covering for something else. Like who are the voices that are actually making the correct arguments for police reform and lingering effects of racism in the courts and such?
So I'm a little troubled by this question because the movement itself cannot mature into something meaningful. It is too convinced of wrong things. And what we are seeing in the horizontalness of its exercises of power, the fact that it is toppling institutions from within and causing them to start distributing Kool-Aid to the outside world, that phenomenon can't be turned off. The people inside those institutions are confused. And they're not going to become unconfused at some point. So we've got to deal with the fact that they're confused, and something has to rein in their confusion, even if ultimately, as I've been advocating as loudly as I can, even if we deal with the fundamental, I can't even say inequity anymore because they've robbed us of the term equity, but even if the fundamental problems were to be addressed, the force is not this mind-numbing, nihilist, destructive, destroy George Washington nonsense.
Yeah, so, and go after. We didn't end up talking about Black Lives Matter today. Maybe we'll do so on Tuesday. But some of the principles that they have on their website around things like going after the nuclear family as if it's a constructed Western artifact. It suggests that whoever wrote that and whoever let that go up has never gone anywhere else, talked to anyone else, learned history, thought about any other species, anything. The idea that the family is a construct that needs to be destroyed is actually a far more egregious position than that all of the founding fathers need to be canceled. And that does seem to be what is being argued. So, if that's one of the founding principles here, there's no good that can come of it.
This movement, as currently constituted, has no capacity to build. And actually, the failure of the CHAZ, which is now the CHOP.
Oh, yeah? Is it then?
Yes,
what does this stand for?
Capitol Hill Occupied Protest, which doesn't even make sense.
Occupied Protest.
Capitol Hill, CHOP could mean two things. They can't even get an acronym.
So they've got an acronym that they are infighting about what it means?
Right. As people are being killed. Yeah, you want to put up that webpage? That's a Wikipedia page here.
Yeah, I haven't.
Yeah. No.
Well, Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. We can't. That's too small for us to. Oh, there it is. Yep.
It's also known as Free Capitol Hill and referred to as the Capitol Hill Organized Protest and the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. So if you can't get your acronym straight so that there are 4 terms running around for exactly the same location and people are being shot, there's a pretty good chance you don't really know how civilization works and you're not the people to whom it should be handed over.
This is one of the things that happens when you abandon the idea of leaders, and this is what you've talked about now on Joe Rogan and elsewhere, and here, this is what we saw, but you saw more intimately with Occupy.
Yep.
That from the beginning it was understood to be leaderless by intention.
Yep.
But the leaderlessness was, of course, gamed, as it always will be, as it always will be.
So the final answer to that question, though, is the movement cannot build. The movement, however, is scaring the crap out of people so that they may be ready to hear something that many could not hear before. And so to the extent that a bunch of us are scrambling, trying to point out what the actual meaning of this moment is and what needs to happen in order to prevent us from sliding into a maoist takeover, to which we seem to be headed, that might open the door to positive change. And I am loath to give credit to people who have threatened the foundations of civilization in order to move things. But if we get there, I guess we can fight about how to address the history.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions from this and then switch to the other, the super chat from the current live stream. This one is a 2-part question. You've consistently described elements of the protest as maoist. Are you aware that Steve Bannon and others like him are using the exact same term? Second question, in describing protests as maoist, what incentive do protesters and sympathizers have to listen with an open mind to your perspective? How does it encourage rational engagement or compromise? So to the first question, I didn't know that Steve Bannon and others like him, whatever that means exactly, are using the exact same term. And I'm no fan of Steve Bannon, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if people who are actually, hateful, and I'm not saying that Steve Bannon is, but, it doesn't matter if people who are completely hateful come to the same conclusion that you are. That does not render your conclusion false.
Well, and, if you're going to behave in a Maoist fashion, and the problem is we're left grasping for alternatives. It's so Maoist. It's so, struggle sessions have emerged. Do we need to invent some other personal euphemism that Steve Bannon won't have heard of in order that he won't settle on the same formulation?
It's not, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? So, do we have a red guard? Not exactly. Is it exactly to a detail struggle sessions? No, but of all of the possible comparisons, and we listed a few of them actually in our Washington Examiner article in 2017 after Evergreen blew up, that we were the 4,500 words, the longest piece that we've written about what happened at Evergreen, far from complete. But we started, I think, by saying, is this the Jacobins? Is this the French Revolution? Is this the brown shirts? Is this the Cultural Revolution? Not exactly any of them, but a little bit of each. And really the closest one that I've seen, and neither of us are historians, and I'm sure we're missing a lot of detail here, but is the Cultural Revolution, that this looks like China in the 60s.
And to the extent that there's a question about, does this lead to openness on the part of those behaving this way to hearing what we have to say, my hope actually, I don't think most of them know anything about the Red Guard. They don't know anything about the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution. And to the extent that they start hearing an accusation that they can't field because they don't know anything about it, maybe they'll look it up and they will notice their own behavior matching this thing, and they'll think, that's odd. I don't want to live that way. Why am I behaving in this fashion? Now, I'm not expecting that to wash over them, but to the extent that one could plant a seed that got them to look up something useful, the parallel is too close to be ignored. And you can't really, we get into this too with the lab leak hypothesis. Trump has politicized the idea that maybe this came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. What are we to do? Not talk about it because Trump has something that overlaps sort of with what we're saying?
This is anti-science. Yeah. This is dismissing ideas on the basis that someone else who believes it is hateful or antithetical to the cause that you believe in. This is explicitly anti-scientific. I will say that in the last couple of weeks, I asked some friends for their suggestions as to how to learn more about the Cultural Revolution, because I read a bit decades ago when I was in high school and college, and really haven't gone back recently. So as you know, I've got this pile of books now waiting for me to dig in, and I've poked in a few places, and it's hard not to act as a verificationist, right? It's hard not to just see the confirming examples. And I'm trying to do the falsificationist thing that we always try to do. But so far, and I'm not very far into any of them, I am more affirmed in my sense that this looks more like China in the 60s than any of these other examples that we have.
Yeah. And I think it's good that you've got the books, and I think we know they're not going to burn themselves. So
I certainly hope not.
Yeah.
Self-immolating books. Great.
Hey, that's a thing.
Oh, yay. Okay, one more from this live stream, then we'll switch to the next one. What do you think about youth sports commencing? Kids need a lot of activity and seem relatively safe from severe cases. Could also help get them more vitamin D. Yeah, I think this should be happening, and there is risk. There's more risk than if the kids are just hanging out alone. It is. But I think that risk is pretty low. Up at the school near us that we take walks up to with the dog and sometimes play speedminton and such in the field there. The playground is it's heartbreaking. You see single kids, throwing a basketball into the hoop, and the play structures themselves for the younger kids are roped off with caution tape. And the playgrounds isn't about youth sports, but I know that our younger son in particular would so benefit from being able to run around in a coordinated fashion and play and engage physically with other people. That this would be a huge boon. And does it come with a risk? Yeah, but I think the risk is low.
Yep. I think the real risk is the downstream. The kids seem to be relatively safe even when they get the infection, and the likelihood of getting the infection outdoor during the day, I would say maybe limit the competitive play to times when the sun is shining, because then you've got the benefit of the UV. But there's also other things that you can do that aren't organized sports that would have almost no risk. And so anyway, I will end up talking more about this device later. But if you have the resources, you might get your kids electric unicycles, and they could go learn them, and that'll occupy them for a month or two as they're learning it, and then they can go adventure. And the thing is, it's a very high volume of air that passes by you. So you can have fun with other people without being right up in their faces. And
there's also, I think you've heard of it, a bicycle.
That's like 2 electric.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Bicycle's a good one too.
Yeah.
So that's an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, and there were many lovely comments in the last super chat as well that we didn't get to. First one in the next. I too like shaggy dog stories. Tell us about the knife in the back corner.
The knife in the back corner is a handmade knife by a friend of ours who is a swordsmith. It is either, I don't know, I'm going to butcher this and then I'm going to be in trouble.
Oh.
Is it Valerian steel or Damascus steel? Which one of those is a real thing?
Yeah. Dave, if you're watching, let us know.
Dave is now shaking his fist at the screen.
He also incidentally made the DarkHorse logo.
The logo. I added the LEDs, but anyway, yes. So thanks, Dave, for the cool knife and the emblem.
we don't have a story beyond that, right?
Yeah, no, it's just a knife that he made with us in mind, and we love it. And it's really cool. I don't know if you can see the layering of the steel. Can you see the layering of the steel?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really nice knife.
Cool. Okay, next question. Hail, professors. Do you think the orienting reflex plays a role in how folks interact on the internet? I believe it was a Russian psychologist that Professor Peterson referenced in his first book who discovered it. I am not familiar with the orienting reflex, and I have also not read Jordan's first book, although I should have. So I don't know it. Do you know it?
I don't either.
Sorry. I have a solution for cyclical poverty. Pay people, government program, to not have kids until they are 18 years old. Pay parents to enter the program. Pay kids at 18 to 28 double payment for higher ed completion. Reward marriage with kids. So there's some pieces in there I don't quite get, but it's incentivizing not having kids young. And I think financial incentives to engage in behavior that is societally beneficial has a long history. It is sometimes troubled, but it often works. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it in theory, and something like this could work. What is the joke?
There's no joke. It's a very sad moment. The problem is that a proposal like that, which I don't know about the details of the proposal, but the basic idea is that we should incentivize the behavior that we think is valuable. And unfortunately, this is why BLM has taken up arms against the nuclear family, rendering this proposal racist. So the question is, how can we bootstrap our way out of the little trap that's been set for us, where we can start to talk about what's actually good and how to get it to more people? So that's the puzzle. But anyway, the idea of incentives to lead us in the direction of things that are actually beneficial, of course.
All right. We get, this is a Pick the one you like most. We've got 3 options. This is in 4 different questions. Pick the one you like most. 1. So we're going to answer one of these questions. That's the idea. Does globalization make us vulnerable to invasive species-like ideas, mind viruses, if you will? And how do we incentivize info businesses to localize? For now, trying to get most users is the only winning strategy. That's one option. 2, should we want healthy competition among nations? And if so, how do we make it happen? 3, let's steelman the rule, all whites should be considered racist properly. I guess you know about false positives and false negatives. So which one of those do you want to take on?
The first one, I think.
So let me just repeat it. Does globalization make us vulnerable to invasive species-like ideas, maybe mind viruses? And how do we incentivize info businesses to localize? For now, trying to get the most users is the only winning strategy.
Yeah. There's definitely a problem. It is actually a challenge to something I have sadly advocated, which is that maybe it is time for us to have a global language, that the danger of us speaking languages that are distinct and therefore miscommunicating or having lower precision communication when something important is at stake is something we can no longer afford. And the fact of plugging us all into the same language is obviously going to make the invasive idea problem worse.
Yeah.
On the other hand,
it's harder to hide.
I think we do know the solution to invasive bad ideas. The solution is high quality critical thinking skills. And we do a really terrible job of passing these on. Even in the good neighborhoods, we don't teach this, right? We teach something much more mundane, much more targeted at turning people into cogs to operate machines that we frankly no longer even use.
Maybe especially in some ways, because in the so-called good neighborhoods, the education is still pretty crappy.
Yep.
Private schools being a partial exception. But at least in neighborhoods that are, frankly more dangerous, kids end up with some street smarts. They end up knowing some things about how things operate in a way that, frankly, the pretty privileged kids who are mostly behind the riots and speaking on behalf of a bunch of people who they mostly have never met don't know anything about. It's mostly led by people who actually don't have the life experience of knowing either critical thinking or actually like physical engagement with the world in form of a craft or something.
Yeah. So we should be doing a lot more physical skills in education where, and this has been a mantra for both of us, where there is no judgment necessary on the part of a human being in order to figure out whether you have succeeded or failed.
Yep.
Right? When you're juggling, you know if you've dropped the balls, right? It's not a judgment call. So engagement with those kinds of skills teaches the mind to think. And teaching the mind to think is like teaching it to spot nice sounding wrong ideas. And if there's one reason to be absolutely frightened of what's taking place in our streets, it's the impression that the people who are telling us what needs to happen next do not have the basics with respect to understanding what might work and what will definitely not.
Yeah. One more thing on this question. I do think, picking up on your point about a global language, it's never sat right with me. I know it doesn't sit right with you either. You've advocated it. You don't like it. One cost of it that I hadn't really considered is that it does make outposts more difficult. Places where interesting ideas can hide, and people can not be exposed to bad ideas, but also hide out and discuss the bad ideas that are coming in and sort of wall themselves off. And it's, as people who have loved exploring a lot of the world, both through doing our research and through just traveling, certainly the fact of people speaking different languages has been more often a barrier than something alluring. Neither of us are particularly adept in picking up new languages, whereas making friends with a little bit of language and experiencing food and different cultural events, that's all super easy and wonderful, and for us, and is one of the values of travel. But language, in part because it does keep us separate, is also therefore protective. Multiple languages.
Yep. I agree. There's a trade-off.
Yeah. Bret, you said it would be hard for you and Sam Harris to do psychedelics together. Do
Not as hard as it would be for anybody who was with us.
Yeah. Yeah, that question came about. Someone asked if you and me and Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson would consider doing psychedelics together to address the problems of the world. And I think we arrived at, like, hopefully Jordan and I can go hang out and talk, because you and Sam are going to be doing something that we don't want to have to observe. So the second part of the question is, do you two have some disagreements or things to work out?
We have, I think, a very small number of very significant disagreements that unfortunately haunt all of the stuff on which we might otherwise make progress. So I'd actually like to solve that problem.
Yeah.
But, you know.
No, I just think, I don't know. I've never seen Sam on psychedelics, but I have the sense that the two of you would become wall-like and not get anywhere with each other. And that, yes, it would be frankly more frustrating for the other people in the room than maybe for you. You might have great fun.
Let's just say, actually, it would depend a lot on what psychedelic.
Often, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes a difference.
Yang Gang, we were told.
Well, right.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about having put forth the DarkHorse duo hypothesis on Rogan, having done so here in episode 19?
Yes. Many of you will have been around for episode 19 and have watched our stream fail spectacularly on the mention of William McRaven. Yep. But in any case, I advanced the DarkHorse duo plan, separate from the people who I proposed as the inhabitants of the plan, on Joe Rogan, and I have seen a ton of really positive feedback. I'm very heartened. People are energized by the idea. I think they, even though we didn't talk that much about what problems it solves, they seem to intuit what problems it solves. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I think the hard part is that we actually have to draft either these two people or other people into the proposal. There aren't that many people who would be good. I think these are the right two people if they will do it, but they're not going to sign on to a plan that is a Hail Mary. It has to have public pressure so that they know they're not going to be left hung out to dry by, quixotic, run against the major party candidates. So
no one with actual reach is going to engage in something that seems like tilting at windmills.
Right.
To use your reference.
Right. Nor should they. It has to be credible, which means it has to have public pressure behind it. And I think it should. And anyway, we can say more about it later, but keep the pressure going and spread the word. And if we can persuade them, I mean, here's the key. Come November, we could all feel so much better. We could know that we're turning the corner, right? November isn't that far off. And if we elect Trump or Biden, then we're looking at 4 more years of the same madness. And frankly, I don't know that we can survive it.
They are A-list decrepit clowns.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're A+ list decrepit clowns.
That's not a thing. Like for Echo asks, like for telomeres, do lab animals have lower vitamin D than in the wild? Does COVID-19 being more severe for people with low vitamin D suggest that it's been selected for through gain-of-function research in lab animals? Oh.
I caught the beginning of that.
Interesting. Maybe. I mean, I think, really, why wouldn't lab animals have lower vitamin D than in the wild? Of course they would, unless they're being supplemented tremendously. And even so, supplements are not the same as getting it through synthesizing it from sunlight. So this strikes me as a very interesting question.
Excellent question. Yep. I don't know what the situation is with other creatures, especially furry creatures, and vitamin D.
All their vitamin D on their nose.
Nor do I know what happens with human cells that are not part of a human. I don't know what these tissues are, if these tissues are basically vitamin D deficient inherently.
Yeah.
Anyway, it'd be worth knowing.
Yeah.
If somebody out there knows, please point us in the right direction. Bret Weinstein it's support at brettweinstein.net. That's it.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is it useful to model bad behavior, to be defined, bad behavior, as the category of mind viruses that can invade our societies or institutions? Would it help to make people more conscious of the danger of behaving badly in society?
I'm not sure what the question means.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Is it useful to model bad behavior as the category of mind viruses that can invade our society?
Is it useful to think of bad behavior? Maybe that's what it means.
Okay. As the category of mind viruses that can invade our societies or institutions. That's not perfect because, success doesn't inherently make you bad. So there are bad things that can be successful and good things as well.
Yeah. I would say the problem is that most often what you're looking at is something that serves the individual or some small entity at cost to the larger population that spreads because of that conflict, which is not really virus-like unless you think of it almost makes the individual virus-like. It's not a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So there are truly bad ideas that are kind of contagious, like, oh God, if I say Pokemon Go, are we going to lose half the people who listen to us?
It's okay.
Playing Pokemon Go, that's not good for you at expense to society. It's just bad for everybody involved and addictive, right? So that's kind of mind virusy.
Yep. Why is the, oh boy, I don't know this term. Maybe you do, Bret, the Gini coefficient. Why is the Gini coefficient, it's this one.
Yeah, I see it.
Why is the Gini coefficient not part of the conversation, even though it explains clearly that inequality is the root of crime? The West is the 1% of the world, but we only see what's close to us. Thank you.
I'm trying to remember what that coefficient is, and without it, I'm not going to be able to answer this question.
Yeah, you know what? We're gonna. I'm gonna put this at the top of.
Yeah,
we'll come back to this at the beginning of the Q&A next time. If you would highlight it, Zach, that would be great. Bret and Heather, actually, what are we doing on time?
You have like 3 minutes left.
All right, so we're gonna get a couple more of these. Try to get through a few more of these. Bret and Heather, how do you feel about #citizen science based UBI blockchain? Orgs like CureCoin demonstrated it. 300 science projects away incentives. It sort of falls off there. Do you know much about this?
A little bit.
I know the hashtag, but that's about it.
Let's put it to you this way. It's the right idea. To bootstrap some mechanism that can think straight by being independent of the corrupt institutions is the right idea. Some kind of cryptocurrency connection that allows this thing to get funded, the right idea. So anyway, it's one of a number of projects that has that basic framework, and I have got some people lined up to come on the podcast to talk about their version, which is not inherently science-oriented, although I see no reason that it could not be utilized for it. So anyway, an upcoming episode will have that discussion.
Wonderful. Trump has publicly gathered black leaders to talk and enact realistic reforms, as Bret said he would do. Do you believe your own political biases are keeping you from seeing Trump's moderate solutions? I don't know that to have happened. I believe that would be a crazy thing to just flat out assert and not be true.
Yeah, I just want to know who is on the list. That'll tell us whether or not this is a serious effort or not. I don't think I do ignore Trump's moderate instincts. I think I spend a lot of time trying to not fault him for things that are not fault-worthy, right? There's a lot that's fault-worthy. That's the problem. But I do not go into this with any assumption, as those who are longtime watchers will know. I was rooting for him. I certainly didn't vote for him. But at the point that he was in office, my feeling is whoever has been elected, you should root for them to succeed and to make things better, even if it makes you look foolish.
You even managed to have hope. Said, you know what, he's in. It may be the only...
Maybe he'll pull off the
dark
mask.
Horse, as it were, to be, he was so political that he could get in, even though he was a complete outsider. And now that he's in, maybe he can actually do the reform that he talked about. But there seems to have been precious little swamp draining.
Yeah, I thought he had room, having accomplished what he did, which nobody else could have, or almost nobody else could have. He had room to be the greatest president in history. He could have refounded the nation, but it just
I remember the first time you said that to me. It's like, oh, are you kidding me? But you're right.
I'm just saying, if you could have swapped in another person, right,
absolutely.
at that moment with his cards, they could have refounded the nation.
He had
it could have been
cards,
marvelous. He did,
and he created many of them. And more power to him that he did. But then then what do you do with them?
But, there are trade-offs. And the problem is that the skills that were necessary to get through the gate are not consistent with the instincts that would cause you to go through that refounding process. He's too good at politics to put it aside. I mean, it's basically what he is good at. And so everything is political. So my guess is, even if he has brought people together, he will not be able to resist using it as a political weapon. But please, Mr. President, prove me wrong.
Yeah, right. Let's do 2 more. Previously, you talked about postmodernism versus Marxism and trying to explain identitarianism. Aren't Gramsci, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, and the Frankfurt School the connecting point, using critical theory and to undermine bourgeois values and so on? Yeah, and so we've actually gotten some private communications objecting to our dismissing critical theory and specifically Marcuse, which we talked about in one of the most recent ones in answering a question. But yes, the Frankfurt School seems to be foundational. And the connecting point. And while both of us have been up to speed on all the intricacies here, I certainly am not at the moment, and I don't know that you are at the moment, to speak to all the different ways the connections do and do not track to the current moment.
I'm absolutely up to speed on all of the connections, and I would like to diagram them for you now.
Really?
No. Let me say this. I actually think this is a mistake.
Which?
Trying to do what the questioner is asking us to do. Here's my point.
This is your magic right here.
Well,
no, in a good way. Like this is the Gordian knot stuff that you do so well.
We are in a phase in which all sorts of people have some sort of a dog in the fight somewhere on the level of theory, right? You've got anarchists who are freaking out that they are being synonymized with Antifa, even though Antifa, if you look closely, is basically an anarchist organization and says so. So what I would say is, do not mind the details. They don't matter. This isn't going to be exactly any of these things. Does this movement loosely match the archetype of an anarchist movement? It does. Own it. That's what it is, right? Is this a question of the Frankfurt School? Sort of. But most of the people in the street wouldn't know what the Frankfurt School is. Is this more like, the Cultural Revolution than it is like the Bolshevik Revolution? Well, so far. Does it have elements of the French Revolution? It does. Is it going to be like any of these things? No. You already know that, right? It's going to be new. So the question I was actually trying to convince my parents was the right question when I saw them in LA was, is what's going on now, is it going to be on the same list as the Bolshevik Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, the French Revolution, Cambodia, Nazi Germany? Is it going to be on that list? If so, that's all you need to know. You know what that force is. And the question is, do you have some way to deal with it? Or is getting out of its way the most you can hope for, right? If it belongs on that list, that's good enough. You don't need to parse the details, and you're going to drive yourself crazy, and you're going to waste effort that is at this moment so precious. So don't bother. Just accept that these things are loosely enough right. They don't have to be precise. They have to be accurate. And if they are accurate, we know enough about what comes next that we should go there.
Yeah, you did it.
All right. Excellent.
Last question. The current left seems to be a product of the 1960s. How a left, which intended to liberate customs and ideas from a restrictive society, became restrictive in its own towards politically incorrect ideas. Did it become part of the establishment? Yeah, actually, it did in part become part of the establishment. And this is a point that we've been making for years, since before Evergreen blew up, really, that in part, liberals should be celebrating and recognized for the fact that many of the things that they, before our time, we were fighting for with regard to actual civil rights and, second wave feminism, not the later waves, but, just equality of opportunity for people regardless of demographics. And, and things like restricted working hours and child labor laws, like all of these are actually wins for liberals who became the establishment to some degree.
They became the establishment. Becoming the establishment makes you conservative unless you have a very great strength of character. And I don't mean that conservatives don't have strength of character, but what I mean is that when you have a lot to lose, your tendency to want to conserve the things that got it for you is so high that you don't necessarily update when you should. So that process has, as I think I did a pretty good job on Joe Rogan's program of explaining, that process has frozen normal, regular folks out of a lot of the well-being that society generates, and they're pissed, and that's why they're in the street, and they're not wrong. It is rigged against them, and it's not evenly rigged. It's rigged against some populations more than others, which explains the sort of fusion of Occupy with Black Lives Matter. But the point also, though, is intersectionality is a new solution to an old problem. And unfortunately, the old problem is when you don't have growth to offer people who are demanding growth. When growth makes us feel good because things are getting better, right? And you don't have any growth to offer them, you figure out how you can get some phony growth. And you can get phony growth in a number of ways. You can steal it from the future and make the future worse in order to make the present feel better. Or you can steal it from people who can't defend themselves. So we've got a demographic problem in which corrupt elites in both parties are not sharing well-being that they have earned through what Jim Rutt would call money on money returns, what I would say rent seeking. But those people are not ready to share. And instead of sharing, what they've decided to do is take people who are aggrieved and point them at people who can't defend themselves. It's not that different from what happened in Weimar Germany. Blaming the Jews justified stealing stuff from them and giving it to other people who wanted growth, and the German apparatus couldn't provide it, right? So this is an old trick. Now, in this case, the intersectional version is new. The intersectional version says you can take it from white people because they deserve it. That's what it is. And the point is that's cheaper than sharing. I know my sister-in-law makes a point like this. I've been making that point for a very long time, that instead of sharing what has been hoarded, you can point people at other people they're now allowed to steal from. And, you can just take that sentence and map it onto all of the things that we are now told are desirable. Why would you get rid of the police? Well, certainly going to allow you to steal from people you've now been told you're entitled to steal from, right? It's not that complicated. So is that the revolution you want? Sure as hell ain't the one I want.
And we're done.
All right. Well, we seem to have survived. That's good.
We're alive now anyway.
We are alive, which is one of the things about survival.
Indeed.
It tends to leave you that way. All right, folks.
So we'll be back on Tuesday, and you may put another podcast up in the interim. You want to say anything about that? Or not yet?
Nope. You will stay tuned to this channel. You definitely want to subscribe so that you are alerted when new things drop on this channel, and there are some great ones coming.
Yep. And if you want access to a private Q&A, join my Patreon at one of the levels where you can either ask a question or just be invited to participate. And what else?
What else? Maybe that's it.
Maybe that's it.
So we'll see you Tuesday.
Happy solstice.
All right. Be well, everyone.